Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
There's something deeply offensive about the smell of cheap cologne and expensive grief. That thick, powdery air filled the chapel like fog off the harbor, clinging to skin, crawling into lungs, making you cough even if you weren't crying. Everyone was dressed in black, the kind of black that still had price tags dangling inside the sleeves. The kind of mourning you rent, not wear. There were pearls on necks that had never loved him, and speeches from mouths that never called to check in. Grandpa Carl Harper would have hated every second of it. I stood near the back, right leg slightly bent like I was ready to sprint the hell out of there. The pews creaked under the weight of half-truths and overdressed liars. I didn't cry. I think I used up my tears the day I read the real will. So instead, I watched Uncle Ray slap backs like he was campaigning. I watched Aunt Linda dab the corner of her eye with a handkerchief that matched her handbag. I watched Cousin Travis post an Instagram story from the steps of the chapel, captioned, "R.I.P. Grandpa, real one tumbler glass broken heart." Ray caught my eye as the minister closed the book and motioned for everyone to stand. He moved in like a shark, deliberate, slow, too confident for someone who'd just buried his father. His hand landed on my shoulder with the weight of a man used to getting what he wanted without asking. He leaned in, close enough I could smell the scotch on his breath and feel the warm slide of sweat at his temple. "He left you nothing," he whispered. "Don't make a scene." I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. Not wide. Just enough. Just enough to let him think I believed him. Let him feel like he won. But I'd already read the will. The real one. It was 7 days before the funeral, and I was in Grandpa's den, alone, sorting through old books no one wanted. Aunt Linda had told me to make myself useful, which was code for keep out of the way. The den was filled with the smell of tobacco and leather and old dust, the good kind, the kind that says someone lived here with purpose, the kind that clung to history. I was about to stack a row of Bibles on the bottom shelf when one of them caught my eye. It was thicker than the rest and didn't match the set. The edges were worn, the leather cracked, the spine taped more than once. Inside it, tucked between the book of Proverbs and the back cover, was an envelope. My name was on the front. Not to Maggie. Not Dear Margaret. Just my name, bold and handwritten in Grandpa's unmistakable block letters. I remember just staring at it, for a long time, because something told me this wasn't a birthday card or a forgotten Christmas gift. When I finally opened it, there it was, a copy of a will, notarized, signed, dated just 3 months ago. In it, Grandpa left the land to the state for preservation, the house to be sold and the money split evenly. Except the safe, his personal safe. That he left to me. No one else. Just me. There was a short note in the envelope, scrawled in the margins. "They'll try to twist this. Don't fight them. Let them talk. Let them toast. Then take what's yours." He always liked riddles. Even dying, the old bastard kept playing chess. So when Ray hissed that lie into my ear, I just nodded. Let him think I'd roll over. Let him think I was still the little girl who hid behind Grandma's apron and said please too much. Let him think I hadn't changed after the divorce, after the years of silence, after the world taught me the hard way that sometimes survival means playing small until you strike. The family moved like cattle from the church to the house, the kind of movement that pretends to be solemn, but is really about free food and the smell of money in the air. The Harper estate sat on a hill just outside town, big, old, built from stone and ego. It looked like the kind of place where secrets rot in the walls and memories echo too loud. They poured into the living room like it was a cocktail party instead of a wake. The good crystal came out. Travis made a scene over the Macallan, the 40-year-old stuff, no less. And I saw Ray smirk as if he'd already cashed the checks. "I'll read the will in the study," Ray called out, lifting his glass like a king before a feast. "It's what Dad would have wanted." Bullshit. Grandpa would have wanted half of them thrown into a ditch. But sure, let's pretend this is all according to plan. They started to move toward the study, some clinking glasses, others pretending to care. I stayed where I was, by the hallway, hand in my coat pocket, fingers curled around that envelope. Let them go ahead. Let them drink his scotch and whisper about how the money will change their lives. Because while they made their little toasts to their imagined victories, I stood at the threshold of a different kind of reckoning. The house hadn't felt warm in years, even with the furnace roaring and the fire in the hearth pretending to be cheerful. There was something fundamentally cold about it now, like all the life had left with Grandpa's last breath, and what was left was just shell and show. The rooms were dressed up in polished oak and dusty velvet, walls lined with old portraits of angry-looking men and tight-lipped women who probably hadn't smiled since the Depression. It smelled like lavender polish and wood smoke and the creeping mildew of a legacy held together by pride and rot. The living room pulsed with low laughter and the kind of smug silence that fills the air when people think they've gotten away with something. Ray had already taken the high-backed chair like it was a damn throne, swirling a crystal glass of Grandpa's favorite scotch with a smirk that looked permanently stapled to his face. Linda perched on the armrest like a porcelain gargoyle, one hand clutching her pearls like she expected a burglar to burst through the window and steal her grief. Travis, bless his useless soul, stood near the bar cart trying to open a bottle of Cabernet with a corkscrew upside down. He really did keep the good stuff, Ray announced, lifting his glass like he was about to make a wedding toast. 40-year-old Macallan. Bought it in 1955, the year Elvis got elected. Said it was for his last damn day. There was a long pause before the room burst into polite laughter, but I didn't miss the look Linda shot him. She didn't like unscripted remarks, and Ray had always liked poking at things just to see what bled. And of course, Elvis was never elected to anything but teenage dreams, but nobody here gave a damn about facts, not when there was legacy on the line and inheritance to sip on. I didn't drink. I stood by the hallway, near the grandfather clock that hadn't ticked in a decade, but still looked important. My hands were tucked in the pockets of my coat again, fingers curling and uncurling like they were trying to remember how to stay still. No one noticed me, not really. That was their first mistake. They toasted like kings at a feast, talking about what they'd do with the land, the stocks, the furniture, the silver, the china nobody had used since Grandma's stroke. Travis made a joke about turning the upstairs bedrooms into Airbnb suites and selling Harper whiskey NFTs, which made Linda's face go flat and pale. Ray laughed, but not because it was funny, just because he liked watching her twitch. I kept thinking about the letter. About the line Grandpa had written in the margin, almost like a whisper through time. Let them talk. Let them toast. Then take what's yours. It looped in my head like a warning and a permission slip, both. I glanced at the fireplace, the old stone one that had crackled through so many winters, and stared at the painting above it, the hunting dogs, frozen mid-chase. Most people thought it was glued to the wall. I knew better. In the will I found, the one they hadn't seen, Grandpa left me no land, no bank accounts, no damn stocks or dusty rifles. He left me whatever's in the safe. That's how he wrote it. Plain, cryptic, deliberate. And he didn't mean the one in the study that Ray already cracked open and looted for the petty cash and deeds. No. He meant his safe. The one he hid years ago, behind that painting, back when trust started running thin and families started sniffing around like hungry dogs. I knew the code. Of course I did. It was the date Grandma died, backwards. Nobody else would think of it because nobody else remembered the way he used to trace her initials into the corner of his napkin at dinner. They were too busy talking over him. I listened. That's what they never understood about me. I remembered. Halfway through Ray's second toast, I stepped away. No one stopped me. I didn't say a word. Let them laugh. Let them plan out their fake charities and their new cars and the lake house they thought they were owed. I walked down the hall, boots soft against the worn wood, the click of the clock echoing even though it hadn't worked in years. At the end of the hallway, I turned left. The den was dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I moved straight to the hearth, stood in front of those damn dogs locked in painted pursuit. I reached up, hands steady now, and felt behind the left frame. There it was. The notch. The hidden catch. Grandpa had shown me once, years ago, when he was still sharp and trusted me more than his own kids. He'd called it our little secret and then said, "When the time comes, you'll know." The painting swung out with a soft creak, and there it was. Steel gray, round-dialed, flush against the brickwork. The kind of safe nobody had the patience for anymore. The kind of safe that held more than money. I knelt down and turned the dial, each number like a heartbeat. 7, 14, 19, 59. I didn't open it. Not yet. Behind me, the house roared with laughter again. Another toast. Another lie. Let them have it. For now. The dial turned with that familiar resistance, each number locking into place like a secret memory being carefully uncovered, layer by layer, until the final click dropped into place like the end of an era. I sat still for a moment, hand resting on the cold metal of the handle, feeling the weight of everything that came before this exact second pressing into my chest. The laughter from the living room was muffled now, distant and hollow, like a radio playing in another room, just loud enough to remind me the vultures were still circling, still toasting to their imagined inheritance, still unaware that their kingdom was built on rot. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking with the sound of time forgotten, and inside, neatly organized with the kind of precision Grandpa always preferred, were 3 things that did not belong in the same space, and yet, together, told a story more complete than any will or testament. There was a leather-bound journal, the kind with pages that crackled when turned, thick and yellowed with time, stained at the corners with what looked like oil or coffee or maybe tears. There was a USB stick, just a simple black drive with no label, no decoration, nothing to suggest the weight of what might be hidden inside. And there was an envelope, sealed and marked with my name in the same hard, deliberate handwriting that had guided me here in the first place. For a long moment, I didn't touch anything. I just stared at them, the journal especially, wondering how long it had been since he wrote in it, wondering if he knew I'd be the one to find it, to carry this story forward, or maybe bury it forever. Eventually, I reached for the envelope first, slipping a finger beneath the flap and tearing it open with a practiced quietness that came from a life of moving through rooms like I wasn't there. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. On it, Grandpa had written just a few sentences, but each one landed like a hammer to the chest. They think they won. Let them. Then take back what's yours. They don't know the cost. But you do. Don't let them bury the truth with me. Whatever you decide to do next, make it count. No signature. No goodbye. Just instructions. Just a burden passed hand to hand, from one generation to the next. I folded the letter again, slower this time, feeling the edges catch beneath my fingers, like paper that didn't want to be put away. Then I picked up the journal. It smelled like smoke and old libraries, like the garage where Grandpa kept his tools and told me stories about wars he never fought in but understood all the same. The first few pages were dates and times, old routines, notes about the garden, appointments he never made. But then the tone shifted. The ink got darker. The words got longer. And soon, it wasn't a log, it was a confession. Not in the way you'd expect, not some dramatic deathbed guilt parade, but something quieter. More dangerous. He wrote about the business Ray's business, the construction company that went under just after the housing market crash, the one everyone said was a victim of bad timing and bad luck. Grandpa knew better. He wrote about the permits that were never filed, the labor paid under the table, the loans taken from the family trust without permission. He wrote about how Ray begged him not to go to the police. And how he didn't. Not because he forgave him, but because he didn't trust the courts to punish the right people. There were entire passages about Linda, too, how she knew about the offshore account, but kept quiet in exchange for a new car and a summer in Portugal. There were rants about Travis and his hollow ambition, his inability to finish anything he started, how he once tried to convince Grandpa to mortgage the house for a tech startup that was just a front for gambling debts. And then there were the pages about me, about how he didn't know what to do with all of them anymore. But he trusted me, even if I didn't know why. He trusted me because I listened, because I remembered, because I wasn't like the rest of them. My hands were trembling by the time I set the journal down. I picked up the USB stick last, holding it like it might bite me, like it might explode with the weight of what it carried. I didn't have a laptop with me, not yet, but I knew whatever was on it would change everything. Financials, maybe. Emails. Photos. Leverage. It wasn't just inheritance he'd left me. It was power. Power wrapped in risk, in quiet fury, in the kind of righteousness that comes from living through betrayal and deciding not to forget it. I closed the safe, gently, like I was sealing a grave. Then I stood, straightened my coat, and walked back down the hallway with the same slow purpose of a woman walking into her own trial. In the living room, they were still laughing. Travis was attempting to tell a joke about crypto and cremation that nobody quite understood, and Ray was back in his chair, holding that glass of scotch like it was the goddamn Holy Grail. I walked past the buffet, past the fake smiles, past Linda's quiet murmur about that odd look on Maggie's face, and I went straight to the bar cart. I picked up a glass, crystal, etched, old, and poured 2 fingers of that Macallan, the very bottle they'd been rationing like it held magic. I turned toward them all, raised my glass just high enough to be seen, and took a sip. It burned, but not as much as the truth I was about to bring down on them. It wasn't until the second sip that I felt something settle inside me, not peace, not even satisfaction, but a kind of cold steel resolve that stretched from the back of my teeth down to my spine. The room hadn't changed physically, but the atmosphere had shifted, like a storm cell had rolled in through the windows no one noticed were open. They were still chatting in circles, bloated on self-importance, full of themselves and Grandpa's liquor, not even aware that the mood had turned and the temperature had dropped, metaphorically and otherwise. That's the thing about people like them, they never expect the quiet one to hold the knife. Ray raised his glass again, clearly mid-story about the time he saved the business by cutting out the union boys. He was doing his best impression of humility, which meant speaking just loud enough to sound like a hero, but pausing often enough to make sure people were still listening. Linda was nodding along, lips pursed in polite approval, her pearls practically rattling from how hard she clung to the performance. Travis, predictably, was scrolling on his phone, laughing softly to himself at something unrelated, probably something vulgar and stupid. They barely registered me until I cleared my throat. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I took one step forward, just enough to be visible in the middle of the room, glass still in hand, fingers still wrapped around that USB in my coat pocket like it was a grenade waiting for the pin. I didn't need to raise my voice, because the truth doesn't shout when it walks into a room. It just is, like smoke or silence or the way everyone looks when the jig is finally up. Grandpa left me a little something after all, I said, voice steady, almost conversational. Nothing too flashy. No land. No money. No promises. Ray chuckled before I finished the sentence, a deep, dry laugh that came from somewhere arrogant and half-drunk. Is that right? He said, leaning back, the glass tilting in his hand like he thought he was starring in a courtroom drama. You digging through old drawers hoping for a postcard? A locket? Maybe a used tissue? Linda smirked at that, the kind of smirk only a woman who's worn pearls in the shower can produce, and Travis didn't even look up, just muttered something about Mystery Inheritance DLC like he was narrating his own TikTok. I didn't laugh. I just reached into my coat and pulled out the folder. It was a simple thing, manila, thin, unassuming, but I knew what was inside. And soon, so would they. I held it in both hands for a moment, just long enough to make them uncomfortable, then opened it with deliberate care, like it was a sacred text or maybe the last word in a very long, very ugly argument. He also left me this, I said, pulling out the photo first. It was old, faded slightly at the edges, but the faces were clear. Ray, younger but not young, sitting across a dinner table from a man whose name used to run in the local paper every week before it vanished suddenly. Some scandal, some settlement, some shadow that never got fully explained. In front of them, a check, mid-pass, partially blocked by a bottle of red wine. In the corner of the image, a newspaper headline barely visible, enough to date the photo if someone cared to look closely. Ray's face dropped slowly, like a balloon with a pinprick, not sudden but irreversible. Linda gasped, one hand going to her chest with real emotion this time, the color draining from her face like a faucet. Travis finally looked up and whispered, "Is that photoshopped or something?" "No," I replied, too calm for the truth I was throwing at them. "It's from Grandpa's journal. You remember the safe, right? The one only I had the code to." Ray opened his mouth, probably to deny everything or throw some bullshit legal threat my way, but I kept going before he could reload. "There's more," I said, pulling out 2 printed emails, a copy of a ledger, and a scanned document bearing Ray's digital signature next to a set of numbers that matched the family trust. Construction permits never filed. Funds shifted. Misreported expenses. Offshore transfers. You remember that slump in '09? Grandpa covered it. Quietly. But not blindly. The silence that followed wasn't thick, it was sharp, like glass breaking inside the chest. "I already gave a copy to a lawyer," I added, letting my eyes rest on each of them one at a time. "Just in case anything unfortunate happens to me. Or this folder." Ray stood now, but his posture wasn't confident anymore. It was defensive, confused, like someone who just realized the floor beneath them was no longer solid. "This is blackmail," he said, voice shaky in a way that made me smile without smiling. "No," I answered. "This is my inheritance." Linda sat down slowly, her knees visibly buckling beneath the weight of the moment. Travis muttered something incoherent and stepped away from the bar like the room had become radioactive. They didn't speak for a while after that. They just stared at the folder, then at me, then back at each other like maybe one of them could fix it or explain it away. But they couldn't. Not this time. I walked toward Ray, stopping just close enough that he could see I wasn't bluffing, wasn't playing, wasn't going to crawl back into whatever dark corner they had assigned me all these years. I leaned in close, barely above a whisper, and let the words fall like stones into water. "He told me what you did to Mom." And with that, I walked away, the weight of those words trailing behind me like the beginning of a fire they couldn't put out. The silence that settled over that room after I whispered those 10 words was thick enough to choke on, and for once, nobody tried to fill it with fake condolences or nervous laughter or hollow toasts to a man they never truly knew. Ray just stood there, looking at me like I had just dropped a lit match into a room soaked in gasoline, and in a way, I had. Linda sat as still as a statue, one hand pressed tightly against her thigh like she was holding herself together through sheer force of habit. Travis, for once in his life, didn't say a goddamn word, and I was almost proud of him for that brief flicker of awareness. But none of them understood what I meant, not fully, not yet. That was the thing about this family, they always thought secrets died with the person who kept them. But Grandpa didn't let this one die. It was all in the journal, written between lines about harvest yields and weather complaints, tucked into the spaces most people would skim past. Grandpa wasn't poetic, not even close, but his words carried the weight of a man who had watched too much go wrong and said too little for too long. My mother, his daughter, Ray's sister, had died when I was 19, back when I still believed that bad things happened for no reason, when the official story still sounded plausible if you didn't dig too deep. An accident, they said. Pills and wine and grief. She'd been fragile, they said. Tired. Overwhelmed. Maybe even unstable. But Grandpa never believed that. Not for a second. He wrote about the days leading up to her death, the strange phone calls, the way she seemed agitated after talking to Ray, the threats about money, the pressure to sign something she didn't want to sign. He wrote about how she called him crying one night, saying she felt cornered, saying she didn't know who to trust anymore, not even her own brother. And then she was gone. Just like that. Slipped and fell, they claimed. Prescription mix-up, they offered. Nothing to see here, keep it moving, tragedy in a tight-lipped box. But Grandpa kept digging. Quietly. Carefully. Because he knew Ray, and more importantly, he knew how Ray moved, always 3 steps ahead, always with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, always with a way of twisting things until the truth got bent, just enough to disappear. In one of the later entries, Grandpa wrote, "If I had acted sooner, maybe she'd still be alive." But I waited. I watched. I didn't want to believe what I already knew. That line stuck with me harder than anything else. Because it wasn't just guilt, it was confession. And he didn't write it for himself. He wrote it for me. I don't think he ever planned to go to the police. Not because he didn't want justice, but because he knew how men like Ray operate. They bury evidence, they buy silence, they smile through the scandal until people forget what they were angry about. But what Grandpa could do was make sure someone else had the tools to burn it all down if they chose to. That someone was me. So as I stood there, folders still tucked under my arm, journals still pressing against my ribs through the lining of my coat, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that exact moment. This was never about the money. Not the stocks. Not the land. Not even the safe. This was about justice. It was about finally dragging the truth out of the dark and holding it up to the light, no matter how ugly it looked once exposed. I had the files. I had the timeline. I had the names, the numbers, the connections. If I wanted to, I could take them all down. But here's the thing they never teach you about revenge. It doesn't always come with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's just walking away with the one thing they can't buy, can't fake, and can't ever take back: your damn peace. So I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked each of them in the eye, one at a time, and I held their gaze long enough for them to know I wasn't bluffing. And then I turned and walked out of that house. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it felt clean. Honest. Bracing in a way that reminded me I was alive and that every step forward now was mine alone to take. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I moved down the driveway, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was walking toward it. I passed the old oak tree where Grandpa used to sit and whittle sticks into tiny animals for me when I was a kid. I thought about how he used to say, "Truth doesn't rot, it waits," and for the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. Truth doesn't vanish. It sits. It grows teeth. And when it's ready, it bites back. I didn't look over my shoulder. Didn't need to. Behind me, the house stayed silent. Inside my coat, the journal pressed warm against my heart like a second spine, and in my hand, the folder felt lighter than it should have, considering the damage it could do. They thought the will was the end of the story. But Grandpa knew better. He knew revenge tastes better aged, like his Scotch.